There's an old joke. Two elderly women are at a Catskill Mountain resort, and one of them says, "Boy, the food at this place is really terrible." The other one says, "Yeah, I know, and such small portions." Well, that's essentially how I feel about life. Full of loneliness and misery and suffering and unhappiness, and it's all over much too quickly.
Welcome back. Welcome. So we're going to start now with Stan Grof doing the implications of consciousness research for psychiatry, psychology, and psychotherapy. I'd like to ask you to help me welcome Dr. Grof back to the stage.
Okay, good morning again. I ask if I can sit through this. It's not just a geriatric thing, but I had a couple of car accidents. I have a hip replacement, and I had a fusion in my... so it's a little challenge for me to stand for a long time. So I hope I didn't confuse the cameras. Or are we okay? So the topic I would like to cover is the observations which we have made for over decades, working not just with psychedelics, but with what I call holotropic states of consciousness, which would include shamanic work, for example. It would include holotropic breath work or some other powerful forms of psychotherapy, all the different types of non-ordinary states that move us toward wholeness, the way I described it earlier. So if you do this kind of work, you would experience and see many things for which current psychiatry, psychology has absolutely no explanation. And if they deal with it at all, they would refer to it as anomalous phenomena. We have now a whole sort of development of studying anomalous phenomena. Thomas Kuhn, 1962, wrote a very influential book which was called Structure of Scientific Revolution, where after 15 years of studying the history of science, he found out that science is not what people usually think, like an accumulation of more and more information and formulation ever more accurate hypotheses and theories, until we reach our current understanding, which is the top of anything that has ever been achieved in the whole history of humanity. We have a more accurate understanding of everything, of ourselves, of the universe, than any other group has ever had. So that is a kind of a linear accumulation of knowledge. He found out that actually the history of science breaks down into distinct periods. Each of them is governed by what he called paradigm, a certain set of assumptions, metaphysical, basic metaphysical beliefs, and so on, of suggestion how to conduct research, how to accumulate, what are the relevant topics to look at. And so there's a certain period where the academic community is governed by this paradigm. And then sooner or later it happens that observations come that start challenging the paradigm. Usually at the beginning, it's just dismissed. This was bad research. The guy was not a good scientist. Some mistakes were made, or even accusing people of being crazy or being dishonest. Einstein was initially considered to be crazy. It was so wild what he was presenting. But then what happens that after a while, new information, new observations are made that point in the same direction, and the paradigm is undermined, and it becomes very clear that there's a crisis. And in that crisis is called the period of abnormal science. Kuhn said the normal science is when the academic community is governed by a particular paradigm, and the scientific work, according to him, is similar to chess, problem solving within a set of established parameters. So if you play chess, you have to play it by rules. You don't take the inconvenient piece out out of the chessboard, or turn a peon into a bishop or whatever. So you have to play it by rules. And now, in the period of abnormal science, everything is questioned, and it's allowed to come with wilder and wilder alternatives until one alternative emerges as the new paradigm, and that becomes this obligatory set of rules for the next period until more observations come that challenge that new paradigm. Usually you also rewrite the history of science. Suddenly you have new heroes, people who had the foresight somewhere way back to see it the way it's now becoming a scientific fact. So in this abnormal period, you end up with anomalous phenomena, some observations that the paradigm cannot explain. So just to give you three quick ideas about the paradigm shifts, one major was from the geocentric to the heliocentric system. I don't know if you are aware of the fact that it took 100 years from Copernicus, the Siderius Nuncius, until it was accepted. Okay, and the opposition was not just from the church; it was coming from academic circles. There were all kinds of arguments why the Earth is not the center of the universe and it's the sun. The other one was movement from the phlogiston chemistry. It was Becher's idea that where all the substances were combinations of this royal substance called phlogiston and something else. And again, there were people like Lavoisier, Dalton, who started talking about atoms, and people got fired because they don't believe in phlogiston anymore. No, today we hear about, phlogiston, we would laugh. And the next major one that we experience is the first 3 decades of the 20th century, the movement from Newtonian physics first to theories of relativity and then further to quantum physics, that even Einstein, who actually inspired the development of quantum physics, could not accept until his death. That God doesn't play dice. So this is the question of the paradigm shift. Now, is there any indication that we are at a time of a major paradigm shift right now? We have enormous amount of anomalous observations that came, of course, first from quantum relativistic physics, but now we have the sciences that study consciousness, enormous amount of anomalous phenomena. Somebody is being operated on, they have cardiac arrest, they might even have flat EEG, and consciousness goes out of the body and they're watching what's happening, and then they decide to go for a trip, they go through the walls, check what's happening in other rooms of the building, or they go through the ceiling and check what's happening around the hospital, or go and experience something that's miles or hundreds of miles away. And if you have an open-minded researcher, you would come that these things were actually happening. It can be confirmed. Ken Ring, who's a prominent thanatologist, published a book which is called Mindsight, which is a study of a group of people who were organically blind from birth, and when they had a near-death experience, when the consciousness left the body, they could see what's happening in the room, and he came up with the concept of veridical out-of-body experiences. Not only do they see for the first time in life, but what they see can be verified by people, who have the gift of vision. Now, this is a paradigm challenge if I've ever seen one. Okay, now you don't have to have a medical education to know that if you have your eyes closed, you should not be seeing anything from the outer world, let alone watch it from the ceiling, or see something that's happening 1,000 miles away. So we have any number of those kinds of observations from psychedelic research, from thanatology. We have parapsychological research that has been questioned, observations from powerful forms of experiential psychotherapy, like holotropic breathwork, when we see these kinds of things. So I will focus today on what we have seen that challenges the current paradigm. Now, you will see that if you look at these observations and experiences from holotropic states, like psychedelics and the other forms, there's not much left from current psychology and psychiatry. This is all based on fundamental wrong premises. Now, this is very, very important. That we want a correct way of understanding the psyche, so we can also treat it, in a correct way. But since this is a psychedelic conference, this kind of revision is important, because until that happens, the academic circles will not embrace psychedelic research. That therapy is happening by inducing experiences that we consider pathological, psychospiritual death, rebirth, past life experiences, archetypal experiences, something from the collective unconscious. When it happens spontaneously, people get diagnoses. They would be hospitalized for that, okay? So, on the other hand, if these changes are made that came from the study of consciousness, then psychedelics would be a logical next step. This is the most logical, powerful tool for psychiatry. At this point, we are in a paradigm clash, that the experiences that go beyond the current model would be seen as produced by some unknown pathological process that hits the brain. Okay, so what are the changes that we would have to make? Usually people, when they reach 80 years of age, when they did some research in their life, they look back and what have I found, what conclusions do I make? So I wrote a paper which was published, I think, about 6 years ago in the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, which was called Revision and Re-Enchantment of Psychology, based on these 60 years of study of these states. So what I will be sharing, this was really part of that paper. It was also then published in Czech translation in Prague, but they didn't include it into the main body of the Czech psychiatry. They put it in a section which was our readings. Our readers are writing us. Okay. So what are the changes? So the first change is in the very model of the psyche, the cartography of the psyche. What are the dimensions of our psyche? And we are using a model which is limited to postnatal biography and to the Freudian individual unconscious, which is also a derivative of individual, postnatal biography. So Freud has been criticized for all kinds of things, but something that the psychology has accepted is the idea that basically the psychological history starts after we are born. He said the newborn is a tabula rasa. The newborn is a clean slate. There's nothing there that precedes birth, including birth itself. So current psychiatry does not see birth as being a trauma. 30, 40 hours spent in the birth canal are not seen as a trauma, but when you are born, the nuances of nursing are accepted as, potentially pathogenic factors. There's even an agreement that bonding, the exchange of looks between the mother and the child, can influence the whole history of the relationship between the mother and the child. So the newborn is able to respond to subtleties of exchanges of looks with the mother and subtleties of nursing, but the hours of the travel through the birth canal don't count. There was not consciousness there yet. Actually, it was until 1960 when the medical profession believed that newborns don't have consciousness, that if they respond to some kind of noxious stimulus, that this is just a muscular reaction, it's just a reflex. So this was 1960, they started sort of considering it, and I think about a year ago there was a paper that came from Oxford. British scientists prove that newborn can experience pain. Well, give me a break. I mean, the next time will be scientists prove that dogs can experience pain or cats. So still today, circumcision in many places is done without anesthesia. The idea that there is no consciousness, it's just where they are screaming and they're sort of moving around. It's just a reflex. Okay. So the kind of cartography that emerges out of this is postnatal, things from childhood, things from infancy, but there is a powerful record of the hours that we spend in the birth canal. And in non-ordinary states, this can be relived, the emotions can be expressed, can be processed the way I was talking about it. People have experiences of prenatal life, some of which can be confirmed. They're not just major things that happen prenatally, but people feel even things like if the womb was welcoming or not welcoming, if there was a rejection that was coming already from the maternal organism, even if it was psychologically, let alone if this was like RH incompatibility, where the fetus was for 9 months was actually attacked immunologically. So that all is recorded in the unconscious, and you can experience that. So we have to expand the cartography. Besides the postnatal, there is also the perinatal and the prenatal. But it doesn't end there. We have to add another vast realm, which we now call transpersonal. There's a lot of overlap with the Jungian concept of the collective unconscious. This was a major breakthrough that Jung brought. We don't have just the Freudian individual unconscious, which is like a kind of junkyard, of rejected postnatal things that we have repressed, forgotten, rejected, and so on. But we also have collective unconscious. And Jung had two domains. One was historically, where we can have access to anything that happened in human history. And the other one is the archetypal, the mythological, where we have access in these states to mythological figures and mythological themes, motifs from any culture that has ever existed, whether we know it intellectually or not. So these were the observations that he had. Themes would, motifs would emerge in the dreams of his patients or in some visions of so-called psychotic patients. That didn't make any sense until he discovered some kind of a culture that had this part as part of mythology, something coming from the Gnostic tradition or from Hindu culture or some other parts of the world. So we have access to, in these states, to anything that happened in human history, in principle, potentiality, and also to something that is a mythology of any culture that has ever existed. We have that possibility in non-ordinary states of consciousness. So the image of the psyche that is emerging out of this work starts resembling what we have in the great spiritual philosophies of the East, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, where eventually all the information about the cosmos becomes, at least in principle, available to us. So the second area where we would have to change our thinking in psychiatry would be, but how deep do the roots of emotional and psychosomatic disorders go? Again, in academic psychiatry, if something is not organic, if it's not biological, it started sometimes after we were born. Okay? And then we have, in classical psychoanalysis, we actually can determine the time that it supposedly started and link it to stages of the libidinal development. So if you have alcoholism, addiction, it would be the oral phase, the passive oral phase. before the teeth come. We also, in some of the psychoanalytic works, they linked schizophrenia to the oral phase. Some major problems happening between the mother and the child in the passive oral stage. Manic depressive disorders were linked to the active oral phase. There's already biting, there's already teeth. Then obsessive compulsive neurosis would have started like at the time of the toilet training, around the 2 or 3 age, year of age. Then hysteria, either anxiety hysteria, which would be the phobias, or conversion hysteria, those would start at the time when you're 4, and it's related to some major sexual abuse. So this was the scheme that was developed from the early psychoanalytic work. If you work with holotropic states, psychedelics, and so on, you will find out that you will always it would be always revealed that there are significant connections between the emotional and psychosomatic problems and what happened in our childhood or infancy. Very much the way it's described in psychoanalysis, but the problem is not the whole story. If you have some powerful method of exploring the unconscious, which could be, again, psychedelics or some powerful form of psychotherapy, or spontaneous episode, which is what we call spiritual emergency, but it will be diagnosed as psychosis, then you will find out that there are deeper roots of these problems. A lot of these issues would have roots in the perinatal domain, links to one of the stages of birth. When I was studying these kinds of experiences that people had when the regression went to birth, you can find actually 4 experiential patterns. I call them 4 basic perinatal matrices. One constellation of emotions and physical feelings associated to the state of being still in the womb before the onset of the delivery. Then the second matrix would be the situation where there are contractions in a closed system because the cervix is not open. Then the third matrix is when the cervix opens up and there's a struggle through the birth canal. And the fourth matrix is the actual coming out. So you can link specific types of emotional problems and psychosomatic problems as having roots to one or the other perinatal matrix. For example, claustrophobia would be linked to the situation when the womb contracts and we're sort of caught, trapped. So the beginning of birth is recorded in memory and starts surfacing. We would experience claustrophobia. We have the feeling that the whole world is closing in. We have difficulties breathing, and we have to get out of the environment that brings this kind of association, like a subway or an elevator or a small room, without windows and so on. The third matrix, for example, just to mention a few, that involves also sexual arousal. In that stage, the choking and the pain generates energy which has all the characteristics of sexual energy. It's literally indistinguishable. Freud brought the idea that sexuality doesn't start in puberty, that it starts already on the breast, the oral, anal, urethral, phallic, and so on. Now, this is even more mind-blowing. Our first encounter with sexual energy was before we were even born. Now, why this is interesting is that it means that our first experience of sexuality was in a very precarious situation. We were inflicting pain on another organism. Another organism was inflicting pain on us. We were choking. We experienced pains. We were experiencing enormous anxiety. We were experiencing pressure on the head. So there you have like matrices for all kinds of psychosomatic problems migraine headaches and other kinds of headaches, psychogenic asthma, problems with breathing, and also for that whole range of what Kraft-Ebing called psychopathia sexualis. This is because that first experience of sexuality is in a situation where there is inflicting pain, experiencing pain. There is this environment. There could be feces. There could be urine. It's a situation where there is anxiety. So any kind of connections between sexuality, all these other things, have the deeper roots already in birth. It's not something that happens when you are 3 years old or 4 years old. So you get a completely different understanding of where the emotional psychosomatic problems are coming from. You also would get a sense of where certain kinds of religious experiences come from. For example, people who are reliving birth, they are not just replaying somehow the memory of what happened to them, but it will take in some of the archetypal images. So the whole process then becomes experience of psychospiritual death, rebirth. When you are reliving birth, you are emerging. You don't just see the light of the operation room or the light of the day if you were born outside of the hospital, but the light would have what Jung called numinous quality. It feels sacred, feels spiritual. So it's a combination of very biological rebirth, but also a sort of very major spiritual opening. So this type of experience, death and rebirth, is something that's essential in the ritual and spiritual history of humanity. This is what the shamans experience, the journey into the underworld, death and rebirth. This is what they were inducing in the rites of passage, the way it was described by Arnold van Gennep, the Dutch anthropologist. This is what they were inducing in the ancient mysteries of death and rebirth, the Eleusinian mysteries, the Bacchanalia, the mysteries of Attis and Adonis. In Central America, the mysteries of Xibalba, of the Mayans and the Aztecs, and so on, the mysteries of Quetzalcoatl. So this is an extremely important domain in the psyche that's not taken into consideration at all in current psychiatry. The idea is that you start the psychological history after you are born. It's nothing that's of interest for psychiatrists that precedes birth, including birth itself, unless the birth is so bad that it irreversibly damages the brain. Then we take it into consideration. But just the experience of hours of passing through the birth canal doesn't count for reasons that I cannot understand. That it wouldn't be a plain logic. I mean, if nuances of nursing can make a difference in a person's life, why not whether they were born in 2 hours or 50 hours? Why shouldn't it be important psychologically when they died in the birth canal and they had to be resuscitated? Or why shouldn't it make difference whether they were born by a forceps or by an emergency cesarean section? How come this would be irrelevant in the history of the individual? So this is a major correction. Anybody doing psychedelics or working with psychedelics discovers there is a powerful record of birth, and a lot of issues in our life can be understood from the fact that we carry this in our unconscious. I mentioned before, the influence that it has on the lifestyle, the strategy of life, the kind of a linear approach to life, and so on. Then we have the contribution that comes from the transpersonal level. There are also roots of emotional psychosomatic problems that are transpersonal, not just perinatal. So, for example, I've seen quite a few issues being resolved in connection with people having experiences that they felt were memories of a previous lifetime. When you not only have experiences that coming from another century, another country, but you have the very convincing experience of what has been called déjà vu or déjà vécu. You have the experience and you, this is not new. I recognize the situation. I have once experienced that, déjà vécu, or I have already seen this before, which is déjà vu. And then all kinds of interesting connections between these kinds of experiences and our everyday life. I've seen people who, in years of psychoanalysis, were trying to figure out something and didn't find answer, and then in a psychedelic session would find it in a past life experience as a kind of a carryover from a previous incarnation. Now, whether we believe in reincarnation or not, if we are therapists, we would deprive ourselves of a very powerful, therapeutic mechanism if we don't allow our patients to have past life experiences, or if we put them on tranquilizers if they were past, had past life experiences. The other thing is the roots can be very archetypal. We have seen situations being resolved after people had some powerful archetypal experiences, including one that looked demonic kind of dark energy emerging, where the session looks almost like an exorcism. I have described this in the book, When the Impossible Happens, when this kind of demonic archetype emerged in the middle of a high-dose LSD session. And I describe that situation there. I call it interview with the devil, because there was like a devil speaking through the patient when this kind of energy took over. So some of the roots are archetypal. Now, there are also therapeutic mechanisms that become available. I already mentioned reliving birth, reliving past life experiences. But another major transpersonal experience that has therapeutic potential, which is experience of cosmic unity, experience where the boundaries are melting, you become one with other people, one with humanity, one with nature, one with the universe, one with the divine. Now the problem is that current psychiatry does not have that category, mystical experience, spiritual experience. You get a nasty diagnosis for an experience of cosmic unity. So again, this has to be changed. All ancient and native cultures were seeing these experiences as extremely valuable, and they're integrating them into their worldview and into ritual and spiritual life. So if this experience is supported and is allowed to run, it will create therapeutic changes like nothing that we have in our armamentarium. No other method that's available in psychiatry can do the kind of changes that integrated mystical experience of cosmic unity can do. So we would have to expand the cartography of the psyche, adding the perinatal domain, the transpersonal domain. We would see that actually the roots of psychogenic, emotional, psychosomatic problems don't go just to childhood and infancy, that there is another additional contribution from one of the perinatal matrices, and even deeper from the karmic realm, from the archetypal realm, or even phylogenetic realm. Now, this would seem like very bad news, okay? We thought all we have to do is to clear some things in childhood and infancy, and we'll be fine. And now the playground is the whole universe. But the good news is that there are powerful healing mechanisms of transformation that become available on the perinatal and the transpersonal level, and that we have now means of actually reaching those roots. It will not be talking. You cannot talk out birth or some kind of prenatal trauma. Anything that's pre-verbal, you cannot reach. And again, as I mentioned before, just using tranquilizers or something else to suppress symptoms is not therapy. This is just a symptomatic relief. I remember talked about this once, and Fritjof Capra was there, and he at that time was working on the turning point on the book, and so he was very much interested in these things. And when he talked about this kind of symptomatic treatment that we have in psychiatry, he said it would be like driving a car. You know, you're driving a car, you don't know very much about the car, but you know that if a red light comes on the dashboard, it's bad news. So you're driving and there's a red light, and happens to be a red light that's showing you that they're running out of oil. So you say, I need an expert, so you take it to the garage, and you would have a mechanic who says, red light, no problem. You pulls out the wires and say, you're fine, nothing's showing, you can go back. So you don't want that kind of mechanic. You want a mechanic, not one that makes it impossible for this warning signal to appear. You want somebody who does something with the engine so that it doesn't have to appear. So you want, again, in psychiatry, you want somebody who creates a situation where the symptoms don't have to appear, not the situation where the symptoms would appear if they could, but you prevent them from coming. And it's more and more, the whole psychiatry is becoming now symptomatic treatment, symptomatic suppression. Now, psychiatry historically is a subdiscipline of medicine. Now, in medicine, if you would limit your care to symptomatic treatment, that would be a very lousy medicine. Somebody would come with fever and would say, what do we do with fever? Or put him on ice. Okay, see, that no more temperature, fine. Well, this would not be great. You can use symptomatic treatment if you also simultaneously do causal treatment and you also want the patient to feel more comfortable, or if you cannot do anything else. These are currently incurable, so all you can do is to relieve symptoms. So doing this in psychiatry is treating everything as if it were incurable, as if we didn't have any more effective way of changing the situation, and all we can do is to relieve symptoms. When I was studying psychiatry, we still have sort of the concept that there are uncovering techniques and covering techniques. And, uncovering takes a little longer time, but there's some chance that you will really get to the roots. Whereas the covering was if either you cannot do anymore because of time problems, or if the patient doesn't want anything that has to do with self-exploration and just want relief. They made the choice of going for the covering. But now it's increasingly looking like the uncovering, doesn't exist, or the idea that it doesn't work, and so on, because it ultimately doesn't. If it's just verbal, it doesn't really go deep enough to bring any kind of impressive results. But that's not true if you have some method in which you can reach the deeper sources, like the perinatal and the transpersonal, which you can do with psychedelics or some of the powerful forms of experiential psychotherapy. Now I will go to the next one, which is the strategy of psychotherapy and healing. And that's a very important one. If you look at the world of psychotherapy, we have any number of therapeutic schools. And the problem is that there is no fundamental agreement about some really important issues, like what are the basic motivating forces in the psyche. For Freud, it would be sex. For Adlerians, it would be feelings of inferiority that we are trying to cover up. For Reich, it was we don't have a full sexual life, and the libido is jamming and it's creating the character armor and so on. For Karen Hornheim, the cultural factors. For Sullivan, it was the problems of interpersonal relations and so on. So, what are the basic motivating forces? Why do symptoms develop, and what do they mean? This is fundamental differences. Let's say you take a phobia to a behaviorist, then you take to a Freudian, a totally different story. And you would be offered a totally different technique as being the method of choice, the scientific way of dealing with this. But also the schools that originally were sort of derived from Freudian psychoanalysis, all the disciples of Freud that developed their own techniques. Each of them will be, interpreting differently. Now, if it were true that really understanding intellectually what's happening with the patient and coming with the right kind of technique, right interpretation, properly timed interpretations. When I was 7 years in psychoanalysis, I was also taught to use strategic silence when you just don't respond at all, rather than responding with questions and so on. So each school has different kind of techniques that we are using. And if you look at when people are studying the results, they have not found any significant results in these schools, that there would be significantly better results in one school or another. Last very, very interesting book was by Jerome Frank and his daughter Julia, that was from Johns Hopkins, where they were comparing these schools. So there was some difference between people who got some form of psychotherapy or patients who were on the waiting list, but there was no significant difference between the schools. And the differences seem to be actually inside of the schools, that some of the therapists are known as being better therapists than others. But you cannot say that as a group, you see, Freudians are better results than any other school. Okay? So if it were true that the intellectual understanding of the problem, which is the theory of the school, and then resulting interpretations and handling of the situation would really be important, we would have to have significant differences in the results of these schools, which is not happening. Which means that what is operating there is something that cannot be described, theoretically, scientifically. Something like the quality of the human encounter between the therapist and the client, or the feeling of the client of being unconditionally accepted by another human being, frequently for the first time because they didn't have it in their own family. Feeling of just support, feeling of human contact, and so on. So then, what can work with these holotropic states or psychedelics bring that is different? Now, if you go into this non-ordinary state of consciousness, it functions as a radar. It finds in the unconscious the areas which have a strong emotional charge and which also are close to the threshold of consciousness, which means they're available for processing on that particular day. Something else will have to wait, 3-4 sessions before it becomes ripe, because it comes close to the surface, to the position when it can emerge. But things that emerge, in my experience, things that emerge in psychedelic sessions, by definition, are relevant, are important, because otherwise they would not emerge in that kind of state. It's in a way similar to what Freud was describing for dreams. The idea that we carry emotionally loaded material in the unconscious, and it's held down by the sensor, by the defenses. When we go to sleep, the sensor is weakened, and so these things start surfacing, and they would disturb sleep. So the dream work is actually disguising, this material, so it doesn't wake us up. So for that reason, if you work with dream, you have to work with something that's emotionally important. He called it via regia, working with dreams. Now this is much more true. What emerging in psychedelic sessions is relevant, because otherwise it would not emerge. And it's very frequently different from what we would expect on the basis of some theoretical concepts that we got from our specific kind of training. Let's see. we are asked to really end at 12:30. So I usually tell the story, which I did before the breath work that we did, the pre-conference workshop, for my own analysis, so you understand what I'm talking about. I had a Freudian training, 7 years, and there were seven other psychologists, psychiatrists who were trained by the same analyst, who was the president of the Psychoanalytic Association. And his thing was that he once in a while he fell asleep during psychoanalysis, and we had to do something, try to bring him back, because we felt it was important to have him present when we were free associating. And we were also having seminars where we could ask theoretical questions or discuss case stories, and we borrowing books from his library and so on. But we could ask questions. And so one of us asked the question, what happens when the psychoanalyst falls asleep during the session? If I keep free associating, does therapy continue, or does it require a fully awake psychoanalyst? Now, he wouldn't say this kind of thing doesn't happen. I mean, he knew, we knew, so he had to do something with it. So he said, yeah, it can happen. You know, sometimes you're just plain tired, you haven't slept well, you're recovering from a flu. It can happen. You kind of doze off a little. But he said, but if you are in this business long enough, you wake up only when the stuff that's coming up is irrelevant. You see, when something really important comes up, you know, you wake up and you're right there. He was also, he was from Russia and was a great admirer of Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, who got the Nobel Prize for the conditioned reflexes, working with salivating dogs and so on. And Pavlov frequently talked about the inhibition of the cortex, you know, and that you can maintain a waking point, like in hypnosis. You know, the cortex is inhibited, but there's a waking point where you can connect with the hypnotist. And Pavlov's favorite example was a mother who can sleep through heavy noises, but she wakes up when her own child is moaning. And so my analyst said, it's just like Pavlov's mother. When something really relevant comes up, you wake up and you're right there for your analysand. Well, you know, relevant by whose definition? Had I had an Adlerian therapist or Frommian therapist, you know, they would have fallen asleep and waked up at different parts of my narrative, because what's important for one school isn't for another. So this is amazing for psychedelics and some of the powerful experiential techniques inducing what I call this holotropic state, that what emerges is really relevant, not by a definition of some school, but because otherwise it would not be emerging. It has to be strong enough emotionally and has to be available for processing, has to be in a certain position to the threshold of consciousness to emerge. So even if you don't resolve problems, you get a good idea what you are dealing with and where the problems are in your body as well as psychologically, emotionally. So this you know, no other method has that. This saves us this very difficult decision making. What is relevant? What isn't relevant? And what should we address? And what we should just let go. Okay, just very quickly. Another change that we would have to make is to take a very different position on spirituality. I mean, you know, current science is monistic materialistic. So strictly speaking, I mean, if you come up talking about spirit and it's anything spiritual, then what are you talking about? Haven't you learned your science? Don't you know this is a material universe where, you know, consciousness is alive and intelligence are just epiphenomena, they're just side products of matter. The only thing that really exists is matter. What are you talking about? What is spirit, you know? So you're superstitious, you're gullible, you're into magical thinking. This is all primary process. You want to be sort of rational and see the world for what it is. Now, according to the observations from these states, if your regression in these states goes far enough and reaches at least the perinatal level, then a dimension emerges into your experience which Jung called numinosity. He actually took it from Rudolf Otto. He liked it better than talking it mystical or spiritual or magical or whatever. It's a nice neutral term that basically telling you that now you have a feeling that you are in touch with a dimension of reality which is radically different from your everyday life, and you feel that it's actually superordinated to your ordinary perception. In spiritual literature, they talk about awakening, where you can be in a full-blown mystical state, and actually your everyday existence seems like some kind of dream or hypnosis. You awaken, it's an awakening. You have the feeling that you are getting in touch with dimensions of reality which are more real than what you know from your everyday life. Now, I don't have, again, time to go into it, but I've been for years interested in quantum relativistic physics from the time when we were Fritjof Capra, and I were doing joint seminars talking journeys beyond space and time, where Fritjof would talk about what physicists are finding about the world in quantum relativistic physics. And he would be talking about, matter doesn't really exist. I mean, the deeper you go, the less you're finding, until on the subatomic level you can't even say that something is there. You can just describe the probabilities of it, and then, they could see particles emerging out of the dynamic vacuum, creation out of nothing, and they just disappearing. And the whole universe is just a process. It's all electromagnetic radiation. There are no objects in the world. There are only fields. We should not really be using nouns because everything is a process. So I'd be, Stan Grofing and Oaklanding San Francisco, and because everything is an action. And then we started talking about, the 13.8 billion years ago, there was a dimensionless point, the singularity, and during the Big Bang, the time was created, space was created, and all the matter that now creates billions of galaxies sort of poured, into existence. There were white holes, black holes, wormholes. So after lunch, when people came, their mind was totally blown. And so when I came with mind stuff, it looked pretty down to earth and sober, past lives, why not, archetypes, And I was talking about what happens in some special states of mind, that Fritjof was talking about the material world. And so he also, in Tao of Physics, he showed the conversion between the worldview of quantum relativistic physics and what is known as the perennial philosophy. Now, since then, there were sort of much more specific developments in quantum relativistic physics. I just had a discussion with that was recorded with Amit Goswami, who talks about science within consciousness. We should have science that starts with the fact of consciousness, not with the fact that the world is material. It actually should be up to the materialists to show that what we perceive is really there. It's not such an easy question. What we really know is how we experience the world. What the world is a different thing. Astronomy is not about stars. It's about human experiences, what we call stars. Now, we know that even in the most materialistic system, significant parts are added by consciousness. There are no colors in the world. Science would describe electromagnetic radiation where in certain range we see colors. There are no sounds. The sound is something that's created by consciousness. There's certainly no tastes, no smells. So we should start there. That we know how we experience the world, and then there's other thing. To what extent we can say that these things are really there, or is there some deeper reality? The way the Hindus talk about it, what we perceive is Maya, is a kind of a strange sense of illusion. And what's coming out of quantum relativistic physics is now showing the same, that what we perceive as solid matter might not be really solid matter. So I'm really, we were supposed to have half an hour of discussion, but we are asked to sort of make up for the time that was lost earlier and really end on time. I'll be happy to ask a few questions if you want to come here, but we have to...
Questions? Can we do a few questions, please? Just for a few minutes. We have a mic in the middle aisle, and so if you've got some questions, come up and ask, and we'll spend just a few minutes as much as...
Okay, maybe just say the last thing that I have here, which is the one of the major, conceptual changes would be that consciousness is not and cannot possibly be a product of the brain. Consciousness is something much larger, is a cosmic phenomenon that's a given in the way existence is given. Existence and consciousness are not reducible to anything else. We don't have really any proof that consciousness is coming out of the brain. All we know is there are correlations between what's happening in the brain and states of consciousness, but it's the same relationship that we have in television. See, there's a relationship between the quality of the picture and the sound and what's happening with the components of the set. The correlation is not a proof that the whole program is coming out of that box. You would laugh if somebody would try to figure out, all the transistors and the wires and circuits in the television set and believe that they would understand why at 7 o'clock they get a Mickey Mouse cartoon or Star Trek, that the whole secret is in the box. It leaves the possibility that the set plays some very important role, but it mediates the program, it doesn't generate it. So this would be a really major kind of metaphysical change that we would have to make in our understanding. Okay. So, yeah.
We're going to ask some questions.
Okay.
But I need to point out that it is lunchtime, so we won't be heard. Our feelings won't be heard if you have to leave for lunch appointments. But we're going to stay just for as long as Dr. Grof can stay with us for Q&A. Please.
I will have to go myself in a while, but yeah. I just want to be sure that I really, because of, I explained it in the previous, that because of my age and I have listened to a lot of loud music, which we are using, so I might not get everything, and I really need to understand This is Brigitte, my wife, so I would use her as her ears, which are much better than mine.
So our first question, please.
Test. Thank you. Dr. Grof.
Okay.
Okay?
I can hear, yeah. It's almost a little too much, yeah.
I've followed you for 25 years, read all your books, and made great use of your techniques, both with myself in my personal work and in my community in Hawaii. So thank you very much for your contribution. I have a question and a gift. The question pertains to your first talk today, when you spoke about the shift from hunter-gatherer to a more civilized form of living as being the source of the malignant aggression and insatiable greed. Could you speak a little bit more about the mechanisms of that shift?
Well, what happened there is that when it was hunters and gatherers, they just, for the subsistence and survival, they just go and hunt or they collect things, and they just have just about enough for their survival. There was no sort of accumulation and hoarding of things and so on. Once agriculture came and the cities were developed, there was a possibility of really accumulation of wealth, in which took, different forms, including creating, golden objects, sculptures, and other kind of possessions that then other groups wanted. So you created a surplus with agriculture and what developed the civilization that developed in the cities. And so then you have invasion of other countries to get the wealth which was there. So this was a major change. Is that answering the?
Okay, yeah, thank you. And just 20 seconds for this gift, really. I don't want to take the time.
There were, the other things like Maria Gimbutas also talked about the shift from the matriarchal society to the patriarchal, which seemed to play a big role in development of warfare and so on.
This dissertation called Saharasia talks about desertification in the old world, in the cradle of civilization, being in part a source of the shift to warfare and sex repression. And it's fascinating. It's based on Reichian philosophy and Reich's speculation about emotional desertification and armoring, and the thought that maybe with the current global climate crisis, we're facing a recapitulation of our birth trauma as a species into civilization. So I wanted to just offer you this book, and I've bookmarked just the 1 or 2 pages that might intrigue you.
Thank you so much. I want to remind everybody that a question is an interrogative that ends with your voice going up. So we don't have time for personal comments. I want to stress throughout the whole weekend. So please ask your question of Dr. Grof. Thank you. Next question, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Grof. With referring to the 4 phases of perinatal psychology, specifically the third, can you speak to how a cesarean might change the third phase and not passing through the birth canal?
Yeah, if I talk about birth trauma, that's a very logical question. I presume you are asking about what's called non-labor cesarean, elective cesarean, not emergency cesarean, where it would be birth trauma and the additional problems which are added by the intervention. But if you work with people who are cesarean and doing psychedelics or doing the holotropic breathwork, it would look very, very different. When you get to the perinatal level, it would be about open wounds, about gushing blood, sharp objects, and so on. Sometimes it opens up into past life experiences, portraying the Aztec sacrifice when the body was opened. And the major trauma there is the rapidity of the transition. So there's a very different mechanism. If you have labor, then things get very tough and there is struggle. But if there's a reasonable exposure to birth, that the birth is experienced as a personal success, like a hero's journey, so that there's a sense of accomplishment. And it leaves you on in a cellular level with a sense of optimism. If problems come in life, I can deal with them. I've done it once, I can do it again. Now, if the birth is too overwhelming, then you end up with a situation, life is too difficult, life is too dangerous, I cannot cope, and so on. So it would undermine your optimism. And the cesarean person would not have that sense at all. There would be just, there's a memory of some kind of catastrophic event, sudden event, where this is done within minutes. Something reaches in and they are pulled into a whole other way of existence. So it is not the solution by any chance, And again, I mentioned in the pre-conference workshop, I'm really concerned with what's happening in the world. And I mentioned an example from last trip to Argentina. They have 75% cesarean sections. So before we, birth 3 out of 4 children surgically, we want to know what we are doing psychologically. What kind of humanity are we creating? But again, in medicine, you don't think about birth as having any psychological impact. It is a body mechanics. We counted fingers, and when we were doing obstetrics as students, and at that time you put drops in the eye, just if the mother had gonorrhea, and you sort of look at the blood groups and so on, count the fingers, and if that's everything biologically okay, you're not considered with what impact it might have psychologically. So it is also a trauma, major trauma, but a different kind of trauma. I referred, when this question came before the pre-conference, to the book by Jane English, which is called A Different Doorway, with the subtitle Adventures of a Caesarean Born. She was a physicist who did some work with us, and she was Caesarean and became so fascinated that actually switched from physics to psychology and was putting specific emphasis on studying the differences.
I think we have time for one more question before Dr. Grof has to leave.
Let's make it good then, right? First of all, thank you for sharing your brilliance with us today. Very, very inspiring. I'm Steve Curtis, and 11 years ago I was diagnosed with a terminal cancer, given 2 years to live, for which there was no modern medical treatment. And through many of the tools we talk about here, I basically let go of the cancer, which is called the spontaneous remission in medicine, and found there are many more people like me. And so I wanted to ask you about your perspective on these spontaneous remissions, if you've had interactions with them, and then what you think is behind those.
What is behind? You know, I've done a lot of work with cancer patients. We had a study in the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, over 200 patients, but most of them were what's considered terminal. I was with Walter Pankey. We were the two physicians who were involved in this project. We spent one day in the oncological unit and doing the grand rounds. And when the oncologists gave up on patients, when there was nothing they could do, maybe short of a hypophysectomy or something, they said, "Okay, now you can sort of work with the patient." And so we have not really seen any remission there, any kind of impact on cancer. But then I went to New York City to the Thanatological Association. I talked about the result of the cancer study, and then we started getting self-referred patients who came in some earlier. We saw a couple of remissions there, and certainly attempts of the patients to do something with the cancer. They, in many instances, they could connect with it on a cellular level. They were trying to create a healing field, or they were trying to cut off the blood supply, either aggressively or in a more kind of loving, kind of a healing. And we saw a couple of those remissions in these people who were sort of earlier referrals. And I had a long discussion with Carl Simonton, who was a oncologist who also was interested in the psychological aspects. He had cancer himself when he was 17 and got over it, and then developed a method which was using as an addition to oncological treatment, when you use fantasy, guided fantasy, where you give some form to cancer and some form to the immunological defense, and you do sort of guided imagery with it. And he had some interesting results. But he could give people a confidence, you see, because you can get over it, can be done. I have done it, and then when other people were trying to replicate it, they did not have that element. They would say, "Well, we give one group of the people will get the real treatment, the oncological, and these other guys will also do this, the Simonton stuff, So if you're using the mind as a force, you have to really use it at its best. You cannot be lukewarm about it. It was very fascinating. Actually, at one point he did firewalking, which most of us did in California, and there you have the sense you achieve something that you thought was absolutely impossible. You see, 3 meters of glowing ambers, like 2 inches, and you think this cannot be done. I mean, this would kill me. And then you walk through, and nothing happened. So I said, what other things do I consider impossible? And so then later he wanted, from in earlier stages, that his patients would do firewalking to get a sense of the power that the conviction has. And he believed that what's operating in cancer is very similar to hexing in native societies, when you have like a bone pointing in the Australian Aborigines. That shaman points a bone at a certain person when they want to destroy them, and the whole tribe knows that this happened, and they discount that person. You treat that person as if they were already dead. It's just a matter of time, you know, they were hexed. And so there were instances where Western medicine could not save people who were hexed by a shaman. The most famous thing is from Johns Hopkins, which was the Johns Hopkins Bulletin. Again, I don't have time to tell the whole story. So we believe that our attitude toward cancer functions as a hex. When somebody gets a diagnosis of cancer, that other people start treating that person as if they were already on the way out. And you sort of withdraw the energies that you get from human interaction. And they get into a state which is called giving up syndrome. You know, they're giving up because you feel you have incurable disease, and other people kind of somehow withdraw the vital connection with you. So we believe that to really bring the mind into the treatment of cancer, you have to break that kind of a spell, which he could do, because it can be done. I've done it, you know, you can do it. So, okay.
Thank Stanislav Grof.
Life is divided up into the horrible and the miserable.